He built a golden idol that almost destroyed an entire nation. He rebelled against his own brother, the man chosen by God himself, and yet he became the first high priest of Israel, and his legacy points directly to Jesus Christ. This is the story of Aaron, the man everyone knows as Moses' sidekick, but whose life was far more complex, more flawed, and more significant than most people realize. Many are unaware that Aaron was actually the older sibling, 3 years older than Moses. So how did the older brother end up in the shadow of the younger one? It all began in Egypt, during the darkest period of Israel's slavery. Aaron occupied the middle position among 3 siblings, positioned between his determined sister Miriam and his remarkably talented younger brother Moses, the central figure in the book of Exodus, the individual who guided countless Israelites out of captivity and oppression. It makes perfect sense that he developed a wonderful quality of being cooperative and agreeable, along with the downside of that trait, which was persistent hesitation and lack of firmness in making choices. The book of Exodus in the Hebrew Scriptures tells us that Aaron was a child of Amram and Jochebed, belonging to the tribe of Levi, and he came into the world 3 years before his brother Moses did. In Exodus chapter 6 verse 20, we learn that Amram married Jochebed, who was his father's sister, and she gave birth to both Aaron and Moses. Amram lived to be 137 years old. In Exodus chapter 7 verse 7, we discover that Moses had reached 80 years of age, while Aaron was 83, when the 2 of them stood before Pharaoh to deliver their message. The account of Aaron begins with his birth, which took place while the people of Israel were living as slaves in Egypt. It seems, however, that his birth occurred prior to the terrible decree issued by the Egyptian ruler. In Exodus chapter 1 verse 22, Pharaoh gave orders to all his subjects, declaring that every newborn boy must be thrown into the river, while daughters could be allowed to survive. By the time Moses entered the world, Miriam had already shown herself to be a remarkably bright young woman. In Exodus chapter 2, verses 4 through 8, we read that his sister positioned herself at a distance to observe what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came to the river to wash herself, while her attendants walked beside the water. When she noticed the basket floating among the tall plants, she instructed one of her servants to retrieve it. Upon opening the basket, she discovered the infant inside, and the little one was crying. Her heart was moved with pity, and she recognized immediately that this was a child belonging to the Hebrew people. At that moment, his sister approached the princess and asked whether she should find a Hebrew woman who could care for and feed the baby. The princess agreed and told her to proceed. The young girl hurried away and brought back the baby's own mother. Because of these circumstances, Aaron found himself from his earliest years caught in between a younger sibling who was destined to achieve great fame and an older sister who was bold and self-assured and would eventually become a celebrated figure herself. Eventually, his brother Moses was forced to flee from Egypt because he had committed a serious crime there. Aaron matured into adulthood, took Elisheba as his wife, and together they had 4 sons named Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Throughout the entire narrative of the Exodus, Aaron functions as a helper and supporter to Moses. He received the responsibility of speaking on behalf of Moses whenever they needed to demand the freedom of the Israelites in front of Pharaoh. During this period, Moses was looking after the sheep that belonged to his father-in-law Jethro, who served as a priest in the land of Midian. Moses guided the animals deep into the remote parts of the desert until he arrived at Horeb, which was known as the mountain where God dwelled. In that place, a messenger from the Lord made himself visible to Moses through flames that burned inside a bush. Moses observed something extraordinary. The bush was engulfed in fire, yet it remained completely intact, and was not consumed. Moses decided to walk closer to examine this remarkable phenomenon and understand why the bush continued to burn without being destroyed. When the Lord noticed that Moses had approached to investigate, God spoke to him from inside the burning bush, calling out his name twice. Moses responded by saying that he was present and listening. God instructed him not to come any nearer and commanded him to remove his footwear because he was standing on ground that was sacred and holy. God then identified himself as the same God worshipped by Moses' ancestors, specifically the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Upon hearing this, Moses covered his face because he felt great fear about looking directly at God. The Lord explained that he had certainly witnessed the terrible suffering of his people who lived in Egypt. God declared that he had listened to their desperate cries caused by those who forced them to work as slaves, and he was deeply troubled by their pain and hardship. Therefore, God announced his intention to come down and deliver them from Egyptian control, leading them away to a wonderful and vast territory, a place abundant with prosperity and goodness, where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites currently resided. God then gave Moses his mission, telling him to go before Pharaoh and lead the Israelite people out of Egyptian territory. Moses questioned God, asking what made him qualified to approach Pharaoh and accomplish such a task as bringing the Israelites to freedom. God reassured Moses that divine presence would accompany him, and the proof that God had truly sent him would come when the people were brought out of Egypt and returned to worship at this very mountain. Moses then posed another question to God, wondering what he should say if the Israelites asked him the name of the God who sent him. God responded to Moses with the declaration that his name was simply "I am who I am." Moses was instructed to tell the Israelites that the one called "I am" had sent him to them. God further directed Moses to inform the Israelites that the Lord, who was the God of their ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had sent him. God proclaimed that this would be his name for all time, the name by which people would address him throughout every generation that would ever exist. Moses received instructions to gather together the leaders of Israel and inform them that the Lord had appeared to him with a message stating that God had been watching over them and had witnessed all the terrible things happening to them in Egypt, and God had made a promise to rescue them from their miserable condition and bring them to a land overflowing with abundance and prosperity. After that, Moses and the elders were to present themselves before the Egyptian king and tell him that the Lord, the God of the Hebrew people, had encountered them. They would request permission to travel for 3 days into the desert wilderness so they could present offerings to the Lord their God. However, God revealed that he already knew the Egyptian king would refuse to release them unless he was forced by overwhelming power. Therefore, God declared his intention to use his mighty power against the Egyptians, performing extraordinary and miraculous acts among them. Only after experiencing these wonders would Pharaoh finally agree to let the people leave. Additionally, God promised to cause the Egyptian people to look favorably upon the Israelites, ensuring that when they finally departed, they would leave with valuable possessions rather than going away with nothing. In Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 through 29, Moses raised a concern, asking what he should do if the people refused to trust him or listen to his words, and claimed that the Lord had never actually appeared to him. The Lord responded by asking Moses what he was holding. Moses answered that it was a staff. God told him to drop it onto the ground. When Moses released the staff and let it fall, it transformed into a serpent, causing Moses to flee from it in fear. The Lord then instructed him to extend his hand and grab the creature by its tail. Moses obeyed and grasped the serpent, which immediately changed back into a staff in his grip. The Lord explained that this miracle would convince the people that he had truly appeared to Moses. Then God gave another instruction, telling Moses to place his hand inside his garment. Moses did so, and when he withdrew it, his skin was diseased with leprosy, appearing completely white like snow. God told him to put his hand back inside his garment again. Moses followed the instruction, and when he removed his hand the second time, it had returned to normal, matching the healthy skin on the rest of his body. The Lord then explained that if the people remained unconvinced by the first miraculous sign, perhaps they would accept the second one. However, if both signs failed to persuade them, Moses was to collect water from the Nile River and spill it onto dry land. That water taken from the river would transform into blood upon the ground. Moses then pleaded with the Lord, asking for forgiveness. He confessed that he had never possessed skill in speaking, not in earlier times, and not even after God had begun communicating with him. He described himself as someone who struggled with words and speech. The Lord challenged him, asking who created the human mouth, who determines whether someone cannot hear or cannot speak, who decides if a person can see or remains without sight. The Lord declared that he himself was responsible for all these things. Moses was commanded to proceed. God promised to assist Moses in speaking and would guide him on exactly what words to use. Yet Moses persisted in his reluctance, begging God to send a different person for this task. This response ignited anger in the Lord toward Moses, and God asked about his brother Aaron from the tribe of Levi. God confirmed that Aaron possessed excellent speaking abilities. Furthermore, Aaron was already traveling to meet Moses and would be overjoyed to see him. Moses would communicate with Aaron and provide him with the words to speak. God pledged to help both brothers express themselves and would instruct them on their actions. Aaron would address the people as a representative of Moses, functioning as his voice, while Moses would serve in a role similar to God for Aaron. Moses was also told to carry the staff with him so he could demonstrate the miraculous signs. Following this encounter, Moses returned to his father-in-law Jethro and requested permission to go back to his relatives in Egypt to discover whether any of them remained alive. Jethro granted his blessing and wished him well on his journey. Previously, the Lord had informed Moses while in Midian that he could safely return to Egypt because everyone who had sought to end his life had passed away. Moses gathered his wife and children, placed them on a donkey, and began the journey back to Egypt, carrying the staff that God had given him. The Lord reminded Moses that upon arriving in Egypt, he must demonstrate all the miraculous wonders before Pharaoh that God had empowered him to perform. However, God would make Pharaoh's heart stubborn so that he would refuse to release the people. Moses was to deliver this message to Pharaoh from the Lord. God declared that Israel was like his firstborn child, and he had demanded that Pharaoh release this son to worship him. Because Pharaoh would refuse this command, God would take the life of Pharaoh's own firstborn son. During the journey, at a place where they stopped to rest, the Lord confronted Moses with the intention of taking his life. However, Zipporah quickly grabbed a sharp stone blade, removed the foreskin from her son, and pressed it against Moses' feet. She declared that Moses was a husband marked by blood. After this action, the Lord withdrew and spared Moses. When she spoke of a husband marked by blood, she was referring to the ritual of circumcision. The Lord gave Aaron instructions to travel into the desert to find Moses. Aaron obeyed and encountered Moses at the sacred mountain, greeting him with an affectionate kiss. Moses then shared with Aaron every message that the Lord had commissioned him to deliver, along with all the miraculous demonstrations God had ordered him to perform. Together, Moses and Aaron gathered all the leaders of the Israelite community. In Exodus chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, the Lord explained to Moses that he had established Moses in a position like God before Pharaoh, while Aaron would serve as his prophet. Moses would receive all of God's commands, and Aaron would then communicate to Pharaoh the demand to release the Israelite people from his territory. In Exodus chapter 16, verse 9, Moses directed Aaron to announce to the entire Israelite assembly that they should approach the Lord, who had listened to their grievances. Throughout the events of the plagues, Aaron remained in a supporting role beneath Moses, experiencing both the criticism from the people and the comfort found in prayer, along with certain honors at Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 7 verse 18 describes how the fish living in the river would perish, the water would develop a terrible odor, and the Egyptian people would be disgusted at the thought of drinking from it. In Exodus chapter 8 verse 5, the Lord instructed Moses to have Aaron extend his hand, holding the rod over all the waterways, rivers and pools, to summon frogs across the entire land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 16 verse 2 records how the entire Israelite community voiced their grievances against both Moses and Aaron while in the desert. In Exodus chapter 16 verse 22, they prostrated themselves and questioned God, asking whether the God who rules over all living spirits would punish an entire community because of one person's wrongdoing. Exodus chapter 19 verse 24 contains the Lord's command for Moses to descend and then return with Aaron accompanying him. However, the priests and common people were forbidden from approaching the Lord's presence, or divine punishment would strike them. In Exodus chapter 24 verse 1, Moses received the invitation to ascend toward the Lord, bringing Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 Israelite elders, though they were to worship at a distance. Together they climbed the mountain. On just one occasion does Aaron's name receive the honor of being mentioned before Moses, and only twice did God communicate with Aaron without Moses as an intermediary. Numbers chapter 3, verse 1 introduces the family records of Aaron and Moses from the time when God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. Numbers chapter 18 verse 20 contains the Lord's declaration to Aaron that he, his sons, and his entire family line would carry responsibility for any wrongdoing connected to the holy sanctuary, and Aaron, together with his sons, would bear accountability for any failures related to their priestly duties. God also instructed Aaron to gather his relatives from the tribe of Levi, which was his ancestral tribe, so they could unite with him and assist him while he and his sons served before the tabernacle of witness. These Levites would take care of all his requirements and handle everything needed for the tabernacle. However, they were strictly forbidden from approaching the sacred objects or the altar. Otherwise, death would come upon both them and Aaron. They would work alongside Aaron and manage all the responsibilities of the tabernacle of meeting, but no unauthorized person could come close. Aaron was to fulfill the sacred duties of the sanctuary and the altar to prevent divine anger from falling upon the Israelites. God declared that he had personally selected the Levites from among the Israelite people. They were presented as a gift to Aaron from the Lord, assigned to carry out the work at the tabernacle of meeting. Aaron and his sons were therefore required to perform all priestly functions, handling everything at the altar and within the sacred veil, serving in their appointed roles. God stated that the priesthood was given to Aaron as a gift of service, and any unauthorized person who approached would face death. The Lord also informed Aaron that he had placed him in charge of the special offerings, including all the sacred gifts brought by the Israelites. These were given to Aaron and his sons as their permanent share, according to an eternal decree. From the most sacred items kept from the fire, Aaron would receive his portion. Every offering brought to God, including grain offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings, would be considered most sacred for Aaron and his sons. These were to be consumed in the most sacred area, and only males could eat them. This food was to be treated as holy. Additionally, Aaron would receive the special offerings along with all the wave offerings presented by the Israelites. These were given to Aaron, his sons, and his daughters as a permanent allowance forever. Any family member who was ceremonially pure could consume these offerings. The finest portions of olive oil, the best of the fresh wine and grain, and the first fruits offered to the Lord all belonged to Aaron. Whatever earliest produce from the land that people brought to the Lord would become his property. Any ceremonially clean person in his household could eat it. Everything in Israel that was completely devoted to God would belong to Aaron. Every firstborn creature, whether human or animal, that was presented to the Lord would be his. However, firstborn humans had to be bought back through redemption, as did the firstborn of unclean animals. The redemption price for a month-old child was set at 5 pieces of silver, measured by the sanctuary standard of 20 gerahs per shekel. But the firstborn of cattle, sheep, or goats could not be redeemed because they were sacred. Their blood was to be splashed against the altar, and their fat was to be burned as a fragrant fire offering to the Lord. The meat, however, belonged to Aaron, just as the breast and right leg from wave offerings were his. All the special sacred offerings that the Israelites presented to the Lord were given to Aaron, his sons, and his daughters as their permanent right forever. This represented an unbreakable covenant of salt before the Lord, binding God with Aaron and his descendants for all time. The Lord then told Aaron that he would not receive any land as an inheritance among the Israelites, nor would he possess any territory among them. God himself would be Aaron's portion and his inheritance among the people of Israel. Nevertheless, Aaron acted on his own, apart from Moses, on 2 occasions, and both times ended in tremendous failure. The first instance occurred when Aaron was left in command, while Moses spent time on the mountain. As recorded in Exodus chapter 24, verse 14, Moses instructed the elders to remain there until he and Joshua returned. He informed them that Aaron and Hur would stay with them, and anyone with a problem could approach these 2 men for help. Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 25, describes what happened next. When the people noticed that Moses was taking a long time to descend from the mountain, they approached Aaron and demanded that he create gods to lead them. They complained that Moses, the man who had led them out of Egypt, had disappeared, and they had no idea what had happened to him. Aaron instructed them to remove the gold earrings worn by their wives, sons, and daughters and bring them to him. The people obeyed and collected all their gold earrings, delivering them to Aaron. He accepted the gold, used tools to shape it, and formed it into a statue of a calf. The people then proclaimed that this was their God who had rescued them from Egypt. When Aaron observed their reaction, he constructed an altar in front of the idol. Aaron announced that the following day would be a celebration honoring the Lord. The people woke early the next morning, presented burnt offerings and peace offerings at the altar. Afterward, they feasted on food and drink, then engaged in revelry. The Lord spoke to Moses, commanding him to descend immediately, because the people he had brought from Egypt had become corrupt. They had quickly abandoned the path that God had commanded them to follow. They had constructed a calf idol, bowed down before it, offered sacrifices to it, and declared it to be the God who delivered them from Egypt. The Lord told Moses that he had observed these people and recognized them as stubborn and rebellious. God demanded that Moses step aside so divine fury could blaze against them and destroy them completely, after which God would establish a great nation through Moses instead. Moses urgently appealed to the Lord his God, questioning why divine anger burned so intensely against the people whom God himself had rescued from Egypt through extraordinary power and strength. Moses asked what the Egyptians would say if they heard about this destruction. They would claim that God brought the Israelites out only to harm them, to slaughter them in the mountains and to wipe them from existence. Moses begged God to turn away from this fierce anger and change his mind about bringing disaster upon his people. He reminded God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, the servants to whom God had personally sworn an oath, promising to multiply their descendants like the stars in the sky and to give them the promised land as an eternal inheritance. In response to this plea, the Lord changed his mind and did not carry out the destruction he had threatened against his people. Moses turned around and descended from the mountain, carrying the 2 stone tablets containing the testimony in his hands. These tablets had writing carved on both their front and back surfaces. The tablets themselves were crafted by God, and the words inscribed on them were written by God's own hand. When Joshua heard the loud sounds coming from the people below, he told Moses that it seemed like the noise of battle was erupting in the camp. Moses disagreed, explaining that the sound was neither the triumphant shouting of victory nor the mournful cries of defeat, but rather the sound of people singing. As soon as Moses approached the camp and witnessed the golden calf and the people dancing around it, his anger exploded. He hurled the tablets from his grasp and shattered them against the base of the mountain. He then seized the calf that the people had created, threw it into the flames, and crushed what remained into fine dust. He scattered this powder across the water and forced the Israelites to drink it. Moses confronted Aaron, demanding to know what the people had done to him that caused him to lead them into such a terrible transgression. Aaron pleaded with Moses not to let his fury burn against him. Aaron reminded Moses that he understood how these people were naturally inclined toward wrongdoing. They had approached him demanding that he fashion gods to guide them, complaining that Moses, the leader who had brought them out of Egypt, had vanished, and no one knew what had happened to him. Aaron claimed that he simply asked anyone with gold to remove it and hand it over. They gave him their gold. He threw it into the flames, and somehow this calf emerged from the fire. Moses observed that the people had become completely out of control because Aaron had failed to maintain order over them, bringing disgrace upon them before their enemies. Aaron provoked the Lord's fury through his actions, and only the intercession of his brother saved him from destruction. Deuteronomy chapter 9 verse 20 confirms this, stating that the Lord was extremely furious with Aaron and intended to destroy him, but Moses prayed on Aaron's behalf at that time. The second major failure occurred when Aaron joined an unwise family rebellion against Moses, arguing that both he and Miriam deserved greater acknowledgement as vessels of divine communication. Numbers chapter 12 records how Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses regarding the Ethiopian woman he had taken as his wife. They questioned whether the Lord communicated exclusively through Moses, pointing out that God had also spoken through them. The Lord overheard their complaints. The scripture notes that Moses was an exceptionally humble man, more modest than any other person living on earth at that time. Without warning, the Lord summoned Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, commanding all 3 to come to the tabernacle of meeting. The 3 siblings obeyed and came forward. The Lord descended in a column of cloud and positioned himself at the entrance of the tabernacle, then called Aaron and Miriam to approach. God spoke, instructing them to listen carefully. If any prophet existed among them, the Lord would reveal himself through visions and communicate through dreams. However, the relationship with Moses was entirely different because he remained faithful throughout God's entire household. God spoke with Moses directly, face to face, using clear language rather than mysterious riddles. Moses was even permitted to see the form of the Lord. God demanded to know why they had not feared speaking against his servant Moses. The Lord's anger blazed against them before he departed. When the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, Miriam was suddenly struck with leprosy, her skin turning completely white like snow. Aaron looked at his sister and saw that she had become diseased. Aaron immediately appealed to Moses, begging him not to hold this sin against them, acknowledging that they had acted foolishly and committed a serious wrong. He pleaded that Miriam not be left like a stillborn infant whose body is partially decomposed at birth. Moses cried out desperately to the Lord, begging God to restore her health. The Lord responded to Moses, explaining that if her own father had spit in her face as a sign of disgrace, she would bear that shame for 7 days. Therefore, she must be isolated outside the camp for 7 days, after which she could be welcomed back. Miriam remained excluded from the camp for that entire period, and the Israelites delayed their journey until she was allowed to return. Following this, the people departed from Hazeroth and established their camp in the wilderness of Paran. Miriam was evidently the primary instigator of this rebellion, and the reference to Zipporah as a Cushite woman hints at some underlying tension between the sisters-in-law as a contributing factor. As often happens with people who lack inner strength, the easily influenced Aaron allowed himself to be convinced, to become indignant, and take a firm position on the wrong issue. How characteristic it was that Aaron ultimately let himself be swept up in someone else's impulsive anger, ultimately forfeiting his own opportunity to enter Canaan. The entire Israelite community eventually arrived in the wilderness of Zin during the first month, and they settled in Kadesh. It was there that Miriam passed away and was laid to rest. The congregation faced a water shortage, which led them to unite against Moses and Aaron. The people argued with Moses, expressing their grievances loudly. They wished they had perished along with their relatives who died before the Lord. They accused Moses and Aaron of leading the Lord's assembly into this barren wasteland where both people and livestock would die. They complained about being brought out of Egypt only to end up in this terrible location that produced no grain, figs, grapevines, or pomegranates, and lacked even drinking water. Moses and Aaron withdrew from the angry crowd and went to the entrance of the tabernacle of meeting, where they prostrated themselves on the ground. At that moment, the glorious presence of the Lord appeared before them. The Lord then gave instructions to Moses, commanding him to take the rod along with his brother Aaron and assemble the entire community. They were to speak to the rock while the people watched, and it would release its water. In this way, they would provide water from the rock for the people and their livestock to drink. Moses retrieved the rod from the Lord's presence exactly as he had been instructed. Moses and Aaron brought the whole assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses addressed them harshly, calling them rebels and asking whether they expected him to produce water from this rock. Moses then raised his arm and struck the rock 2 times with his rod. Water gushed out in great abundance, providing enough for all the people and their animals to drink. Afterward, the Lord addressed Moses and Aaron, declaring that because they had failed to trust him and failed to honor him as holy before the Israelites, they would not be permitted to lead this community into the Promised Land. This location became known as the waters of Meribah because the Israelites quarreled with the Lord there, and through these events, God demonstrated his holiness among them. Aaron passed away at Mount Hor, and his death was commemorated with an entire month of national mourning. The complete Israelite community traveled from Kadesh and arrived at Mount Hor. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor, which stood near the boundary of Edom's territory. God announced that Aaron would soon join his ancestors in death, because he would not be allowed to enter the land promised to the Israelites. This was the consequence of their disobedience at the waters of Meribah. Moses received instructions to take Aaron and his son Eleazar up Mount Hor, remove Aaron's priestly clothing, and transfer those garments onto Eleazar. Aaron would then die on that mountain and be gathered to his ancestors. Moses carried out everything exactly as the Lord had directed. The 3 men ascended Mount Hor, while the entire congregation watched from below. Moses removed the priestly garments from Aaron and dressed Eleazar in them. Aaron died there at the summit of the mountain. Moses and Eleazar then descended from the mountain together. When the entire community realized that Aaron had died, every household throughout Israel mourned his passing for a full 30 days. Regarding Aaron's role as priest, Scripture as a whole portrays Aaron in a favorable light. The book of Psalms describes him as a shepherd, a priest, someone who was chosen, holy, and anointed by God. Psalm 77 verse 20 declares that God guided his people like a flock of sheep through the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Psalm 99 verse 6 states that Moses and Aaron served among God's priests, alongside Samuel, who was among those who called upon his name. When they cried out to the Lord, he responded to their prayers. Psalm 105 verse 26 affirms that God sent Moses as his servant, along with Aaron, the one he had selected for this purpose. Psalm 106 verse 1 calls for praise to the Lord, urging thankfulness because he is good and his faithful love continues forever. Psalm 133 verse 2 compares unity to precious anointing oil poured on the head, flowing down over the beard of Aaron, dripping all the way to the collar of his robes. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, Aaron's priestly role serves as a preview of the ultimate high priest, Jesus Christ. Hebrews chapter 2 verses 17 and 18 explain that Jesus needed to become fully human, like his brothers and sisters, so he could serve as a compassionate and trustworthy high priest before God, providing atonement for the sins of humanity. Because he personally endured suffering and faced temptation, he possesses the ability to help others who experience similar trials. Hebrews chapter 4 verses 14 through 16 reminds believers that they have an extraordinary high priest who has entered heaven itself, Jesus the Son of God, and therefore they should maintain their faith firmly. This high priest is not incapable of understanding human frailties, but experienced every kind of temptation that people face, yet never committed any sin. Therefore, believers should approach God's throne of grace with confidence, knowing they will receive mercy and discover grace to assist them whenever they need it. Hebrews chapter 5 verses 1 through 4 explains that every high priest is selected from among ordinary people and appointed to represent humanity in matters relating to God, offering both gifts and sacrifices for wrongdoing. Such a priest can show patience with those who lack understanding and have wandered from the right path because he himself experiences the same human limitations. Because of this shared weakness, the high priest must present offerings not only for the sins of the people, but also for his own failures. No one can claim this distinguished position on his own authority, but must be summoned by God, just as Aaron was called. This illustrates the remarkable honor and purpose to which God elevated this man. God does not depend on human capabilities, but instead lifts people above their shortcomings through his generous grace. In Leviticus chapter 10, verse 10, the responsibilities of the Old Testament priesthood are presented as having both moral and instructional dimensions. That verse commands priests to make clear distinctions between what is sacred and what is ordinary, and between what is ritually impure and what is pure. Addressing the teaching function first, the priest served as the keeper of divine knowledge and provided guidance to the people based on these revealed truths. Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 9 records how Moses recorded the law and entrusted it to the priests descended from Levi, who carried the ark containing God's covenant, and also to all the leaders of Israel. Malachi chapter 2 verses 4 through 7 contains God's declaration that this commandment would confirm his covenant with the tribe of Levi. God's agreement with Levi promised life and peace. God granted these blessings so that Levi would show proper reverence and indeed he demonstrated deep respect and stood in awe of God's name. Truthful instruction came from his mouth, and no dishonesty could be found in his speech. He conducted his life in harmony and righteousness with God, and guided many people away from sinful behavior. The lips of a priest should preserve wisdom and understanding, and people should come to him seeking instruction in God's ways, because he serves as a representative of the Lord of heavenly armies. Numbers chapter 25, verses 12 and 13, contains God's promise to establish his covenant of peace. This covenant would extend to the priest and all his descendants after him, granting them an eternal priesthood. This honor was given because he demonstrated passionate devotion to his God and provided reconciliation for the people of Israel. However, the primary responsibility of priestly life was undeniably focused on addressing the moral failures of the people and leading them through the prescribed sacrificial system into a state of divine acceptance, reconciliation, and pardon. Leviticus chapter 1 verse 3 specifies that if someone wished to present a burnt sacrifice to the Lord, they should bring a male animal that had no defects. This offering had to be presented voluntarily at the entrance of the tabernacle of meeting in the presence of the Lord. Leviticus chapter 1 verse 4 explains that the person must place their hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and through this action, the sacrifice would be received favorably on their behalf, providing reconciliation for them. Leviticus chapter 4 verse 31 describes how all the fat must be removed, just as it is taken from peace offerings. The priest would burn this fat on the altar, producing an aroma that pleased the Lord. In this way, the priest would obtain forgiveness for the individual, and their sin would be erased. The fundamental meaning behind atonement involves the idea of covering, though not simply hiding something from view. Rather, it functions more like a payment that covers an outstanding debt, completely satisfying and eliminating it. Micah chapter 7 verses 18 and 19 asks what other God exists who forgives wrongdoing and overlooks the rebellion of his remaining people. This God does not hold on to his anger indefinitely, because showing mercy brings him joy. He will once again show compassion toward his people and conquer their sinful tendencies. All their sins will be thrown into the deepest parts of the ocean. The method by which this covering payment worked involved bearing sin, meaning that through God's design, guilt and its consequences were transferred from the guilty party to an innocent one, and the innocent bearer suffered the death penalty that the guilty deserved. The act of the worshipper placing their hand on the animal's head was an essential requirement in every sacrifice. As the book of Leviticus unfolds, this ritual is shown to represent the selection of a substitute and the transfer of the worshipper's personal guilt onto that substitute animal. Leviticus chapter 3 verse 2 instructs the worshipper to lay hands on the offering's head before slaughtering it at the tabernacle entrance, after which the priests descended from Aaron would splash the blood around the altar. Leviticus chapter 3 verse 13 similarly commands placing hands on the animal's head before killing it at the tabernacle, with Aaron's sons sprinkling the blood around the altar. Leviticus chapter 4 verse 4 requires bringing the bull to the tabernacle entrance before the Lord, laying hands on the bull's head, and then killing the animal in the Lord's presence. Leviticus chapter 4 verse 15 describes how the community leaders must place their hands on the bull's head before the Lord, and then the animal must be slaughtered in his presence. Leviticus chapter 4 verse 25 explains that the priest would collect some blood from the sin offering with his finger, apply it to the projecting corners of the burnt offering altar, and pour the remaining blood at the altar's foundation. The ministry performed by priests descended from Aaron was absolutely essential in these sacrificial rituals. This was their sacred duty, and no unauthorized person dared to interfere with it. This priestly work reached its highest point in the most impressive ceremony of all, the annual Day of Atonement, when divine mercy cleansed away all the sins, rebellions, and wrongdoings accumulated throughout the previous year. The high priest played the central role, first by carrying the blood representing the death of the substitute animal into the most sacred space, where it was sprinkled in the very place it was most needed, directly in God's presence and over the entire holy law that had been broken. Leviticus chapter 16 verses 11 through 17 describes this ceremony in detail. Aaron would bring the bull designated as his personal sin offering, make atonement for himself and his family, and slaughter the bull as his own sin offering. He would then fill a container with burning coals from the altar before the Lord, along with handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and carry everything behind the sacred curtain. He would place the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the resulting cloud would cover the mercy seat above the testimony, protecting him from death. He would take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it with his finger on the eastern side of the mercy seat, then sprinkle blood 7 times in front of it. Next, he would slaughter the goat designated as the sin offering for all the people, carry its blood behind the curtain, and perform the same sprinkling ritual as he had done with the bull's blood, applying it on and before the mercy seat. Through this ceremony, he would purify the holy place from the contamination caused by the Israelites' impurity, their rebellious acts, and all their various sins. The same purification was performed for the tabernacle of meeting, which stood among them despite their unclean condition. No other person was permitted inside the tabernacle of meeting from the moment the high priest entered to make atonement in the holy place until he emerged, having completed the atonement for himself, his household, and the entire Israelite community. Nevertheless, the priesthood served an educational purpose, and the people needed to witness and comprehend publicly what the priest had accomplished privately. For this reason, God established the ceremony involving the scapegoat, during which Aaron performed the laying on of hands, verbally recounted the complete account of sin, and symbolically placed all of it onto the goat's head while everyone watched. Through this ritual, the goat was made to carry away all their offenses upon itself. Leviticus chapter 16 verses 20 through 22 describes this ceremony. After completing the purification of the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting, and the altar, the priest would bring forward the living goat. Aaron would place both his hands on the head of this live goat and speak aloud all the wrongdoings of the Israelites, including all their rebellious acts and every type of sin, symbolically transferring them onto the goat's head. The goat would then be led away into the uninhabited wilderness by a designated man. The goat would carry upon itself every wrongdoing of the people as it was led away to a deserted region where the appointed man would set the animal free in the barren wilderness. This represented Aaron's most significant moment of spiritual insight, through which he foreshadowed someone who would suffer because of his people's sins and take upon himself the guilt of countless others. This future figure would offer himself to God as a perfect and flawless sacrifice through the power of the eternal Spirit, serving as both the priest and the single offering for sin that would be effective for all eternity. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 8 describes this promised one. He was seized and taken away from confinement and from his trial. Who could have imagined what would become of his descendants? He was separated from the world of the living, and the punishment he received was because of the rebellious acts committed by God's people. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 12 continues this prophecy. For this reason, God will grant him a share among the powerful, and he will distribute the rewards of victory alongside the mighty. This honor comes because he willingly surrendered his life to death itself, allowed himself to be counted among criminals and lawbreakers, carried the burden of guilt belonging to multitudes of people, and stood as an advocate pleading on behalf of those who had done wrong. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 14, poses a compelling question. If animal sacrifices had some power, how much greater is the cleansing power of Christ's blood? He presented himself to God as a perfect sacrifice without any flaw or imperfection through the working of the eternal Spirit. His sacrifice has the power to wash away the guilt from human consciences, freeing them from meaningless rituals and empty religious practices, so they can truly serve the God who is alive and active.